bring down this bit right here really quick before we go live. Okay, or at least marginal. Do you just want to say something really quick?
Hey, my name is Sheila Arora. Hey everyone, thanks for joining.
Yeah,
Is it good?
You're good. Okay, hold on. Three.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining and welcome to this Facebook Live takeover on the Blick Facebook page. My name is Sheila Arora and I'm an abstract intuitive painter, and I'm so excited to be here with you today to invite you into my sketchbook process. I'll be talking about my sketchbook, how and why I paint in a sketchbook. I'll be showing you the materials that I use to create, including these Liquitex soft body paints and Liquitex acrylic inks. I'll also be painting in a sketchbook page and I'll be answering your questions. So with that, let's get started. This is the sketchbook I'll be working in today. It's a Moleskine watercolor sketchbook, 5 by 8 inches, and I love this size for my small sketchbook. It's really a great size to work on. I actually paint in multiple sketchbooks as part of my painting practice, and I also have a larger sketchbook that's 14 by 17 on mixed media paper. A larger sketchbook will really just allow you to be a little bit more free and expressive when you paint. So if you like what you see today and you want to see more about my paintings and my process, please feel free to follow me on Instagram because I post a lot about my paintings and my sketchbook there. So there's 2 reasons why I like to work in a sketchbook. The first reason is that a sketchbook allows you to be very experimental. You can be very free when you paint. You can try different things. As you can see in this piece, I'm trying out all different marks. I have some wider marks here, some triangles, some stripes, some dots. I'm really just playing around and having fun. It's also a great place to try out different compositions. And as I'm flipping through this sketchbook, you can see that I'm also trying out a lot of different color palettes. So it's really a place to just tap into your intuition, really explore and have fun. At the same time, I like to use my sketchbook to create these beautiful finished pieces. So that's the second reason why I like to keep a sketchbook. And the reason why I like to create beautiful finished pieces for my work is that I want to constantly keep up my painting practice even when I may not have time or the space to do larger paintings. So the sketchbook allows me to do that if I only have 30 minutes or an hour to paint and I may not have access to a large studio space. I can still work in my sketchbook and just pull it out. I love to work my sketchbook right on the kitchen table. It's my favorite place to paint in my sketchbook. So you can just pull out your sketchbook, get out some paints, and really just get started right away. So this lets you to keep your painting practice up. You can build up your muscle memory. You can keep up with your intuition, building up those painting skills so that you have them when you translate that to your larger work. And then the last reason I'll give you that I like to keep a sketchbook, just one more reason, is that it's this beautiful collection of your work over time. So as you can see, as I'm flipping through these pages, I've been working in this sketchbook for the past few months, and it's just such a nice collection of your work. It's really fun to go back to the beginning to see what were you working on, what were those color palettes looking like, what were you thinking and feeling when you were working in that sketchbook. If you're a beginner painter, it's really fun to see the progression of your work. And if you're a more advanced painter, it really allows you to see how your paintings and your style evolves over time. So it's really nice to just have this gorgeous collection of your paintings. And so this is the sketchbook we'll be working in today. Again, it's a Moleskine watercolor sketchbook, 5 by 8 inches. So now I'll move a little bit onto the materials in terms of the paints that I'll be using today. we'll be working with the Liquitex soft body paints and the Liquitex acrylic inks. So you can see here I have the Liquitex soft body paints and Liquitex acrylic inks, and I absolutely love these Liquitex soft body paints. They have a beautiful blend of both consistency and coverage for the paint. So those are the two things, or the two elements of the paint that you'll be looking for. The consistency is going to be the flow of the paint, how it moves along the page. And these are soft body paints, so they'll flow really nicely on the page. And if you look at my work, and I'll just flip open to a sketchbook page, you'll notice that in these sketchbook pages that I do, they have a beautiful flow to the pieces in terms of the visual elements of the painting. So in this piece here, you can see there's a beautiful flow of the composition, there's a nice flow in the marks, and even in the color palette, it really has a nice flow, so your eye is constantly moving throughout the piece. So when you have that beautiful flow, it's really nice to have materials that will support that and that will help you achieve that flow. So that's why I like these Liquitex soft body paints, especially for the consistency. And then also, in addition to consistency, they have excellent coverage, and coverage is going to be that other element you're looking for in your paint. So they have great surface coverage, they have a really nice satin finish, and they're just an really excellent artist grade quality paint with high pigment. So we'll be using these Liquitex soft body paints today. And the other paint we're going to be using are these Liquitex acrylic inks. And I really like the acrylic inks for adding variety to my work. So in addition to flow that I just talked about, even in this piece you can see right here, the other element that's keeping your eye engaged in the piece is the variety. So there's a really nice variety in terms of the lines. There's some very thin lines, some thicker lines, there's organic shapes, geometric shapes. There's just this beautiful variety even in the limited color palette that we have here. So flow, again, is going to keep your eye moving through the piece, and then I love the variety because it keeps your eye engaged. And I always want your eye to be looking in the piece, looking at the different layers, and really being interested in the painting. So the Liquitex acrylic inks are going to get you that variety, and I love them because they're so versatile. They'll be a lot thinner than the soft body paints, so they'll flow a lot more. But that also gives you a lot of other things you can do with these paints. You can create translucent layers with the paints, which is really fun. You can take a fine brush and do some mark making with the paints. You can mix them with other colors. I love to do that, especially for color mixing. So they're really fun, very versatile, and I actually just started using the acrylic inks this year, and I absolutely love them as an addition to my painting practice. Then we'll be using also a Liquitex medium. I'll be using this Liquitex acrylic matte medium. And this is just going to add some more fluidity to the paint. We'll be able to create some layers with the paint as well, some translucent layers. So this will really just add a nice flow to the paint. So I'll be working with the Liquitex matte medium. And then I have a couple different mark making tools. I have some paint pens and some pencils. And these are just going to, again, add that variety that I was talking about that we want to get in our paintings and in our work. So with that, I think that covers our material set. I'm just going to talk a little bit about color before we get started. So the way I approach color, I'm an intuitive painter, and so I approach color very intuitively. So if I look through these pages, and I'll just flip through some of them, you'll notice that I'm going through so many different color palettes. I'm really trying different colors, seeing what I like. I approach color by just feeling into my body, leaning into colors, seeing what I'm drawn to, what do I like. I'll mix colors right on the page, I'll mix colors on my palette, I'll change the color palette completely as I'm going along. So just a very fluid approach to color that's very natural for me. Now, if you're not at that stage yet with color, that's totally fine. I'm going to give you a little bit more structured approach as to how you can approach color, especially for a sketchbook page. So what I've done is I've created some color studies, and I have two of them here, so you can see them here. I'm going to put one down so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And this will just give you a nice way to approach color for a sketchbook page. And what I've done on this piece of paper was just divided it into and created 12 different squares. And then what I did for each of these squares, and you want them fairly small because you want to work a lot of them pretty quickly. So for each of these different squares, I took one of the acrylic inks or one of the soft body paints, and I filled in that particular square. And then, so you should end up with 12 squares that are filled in with solid colors. And you can see here, this is the deep violet. This is a beautiful acrylic ink color. I filled in this square, and then I added on a couple of different layers of paint or using different mark making materials just to see what combinations might look good with that base color paint. And I wrote the base color underneath just so I would know what that main color would be. So when you're done, you should end up with a page of 12 different squares with all different color studies and combinations that you can choose from. And it shouldn't take too long because these are smaller squares and smaller studies. And then when you look at this, you can see, are there certain color combinations that you like? Are there certain ones that you might want to use for your sketchbook page? And if so, you can use that. Or perhaps maybe there's a combination of two of these, or maybe there's some that you don't like at all, and if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. So what I'm going to do is actually use a combination of a few of these for the sketchbook page we'll be painting today. And I've picked out a color palette that's super fun. I think you're going to love it. And I have a sketchbook page that's done in this color palette, so we'll be doing a new sketchbook page, but I'll just show you what the color palette looks like. Let me just find it. Here we go. I absolutely love this color palette. I just think it's so beautiful. It reminds me of that transition of summer into fall. It's got some bright colors, some muted colors, and also some really dark values as well. So the base color here is cobalt teal, and you can see that peeking through in all different places in this sketchbook page. The cobalt teal is mixed in with some white over here, so we'll be using white as well. This here is parchment, which is an off-white. We'll be using that to just add a little variety in our page. And then we have some pops of blue, some cerulean blue, so we'll throw that in. And you can see in this sketchbook page as well, this page has a really nice range of values. So the values will be the lightness or the darkness of the piece. So we have some really dark values on the top, the Payne's gray, and then some really light values here with the white. So it's got this nice range of values, and this dark color here that we're going to use is a Payne's gray. It's a really nice, deep, rich blue color. And sometimes that's really nice to use instead of black, just to add a little bit more richness to the piece. The pops of color here that we're going to use are emerald green and bronze yellow, so that's would be really fun to throw those colors into. And you can see in this piece I've done some mark making. So this is the palette we're going to use. It's about 6 different colors that we're going to play with today, and that's what we're going to use to get started with our sketchbook page. So I'm going to flip open to a new sketchbook page. I'm actually almost done with this sketchbook. So you can see I definitely do paint a lot in my sketchbook. So we'll start a new sketchbook page here. And the way I'm going to approach the sketchbook painting is very intuitively. And that's exactly how I described at the beginning in that experimental stage. So we're just going to play around with the different paints, the soft body paints, the acrylic inks. We're really just going to have a lot of fun when we're painting. We're going to try out different marks, see what the paints do, what the mediums do. It'll just be a very exploratory process. Now, if we come out with the finished painting, that's fantastic. And if not, I will finish the painting tonight. And either way, I will post it on my Instagram so you can see what that looks like, because I really want you to get an idea and a feel for what does it look like to go from the very beginning of a piece. What do those layers look like? Even if they may be messy, how do you take that then to the finished painting? So definitely check my Instagram tomorrow because I'll post the finished piece there. And with that, let's get started painting on this sketchbook page. One of the things I've really been enjoying in terms of starting a sketchbook page has been to use these acrylic inks. So I'm going to take the cerulean blue hue, and I'm just going to put a few drops of the ink on the page. Just a couple drops, just to get the page started. So when I'm starting a piece, I always want to cover the page with something. I want to have something on the page to cover the white surface. So I'm going to take a little bit of medium and really just spread out the ink. You can see how nicely it spreads on the sketchbook page. This is going to be the acrylic ink, which is a lot more fluid. So just spreading out the paint here, just to get started with our sketchbook page.
We've actually got a couple questions.
Okay, great. That's fantastic.
Michelle is wondering what brand of sketchbook are you using?
Yeah, this is a Moleskine watercolor sketchbook, and it's a 5 by 8 inch. So it gives you that landscape view, which is kind of fun. So I actually really enjoy this size for my smaller sketchbook.
All right, and Dove is wondering how you keep your pages from sticking together in your book.
So they actually don't, I don't do anything with them. You can see that they don't stick together. This is acrylic paint, so I think they just naturally don't stick, and maybe the watercolor paper, but I haven't had any issues with the pages sticking, and I keep it pretty flat. So great. So what I wanted to show you next too is, and definitely keep the questions coming, so those are the acrylic inks, and I just want to show you a little bit of the difference of the soft body paint that I described. So this is soft body paint, and this is a cobalt teal. So you can see here how much smoother and thicker this paint is. And some fun things that you can do too is when you're painting, you can mix the paint. I just added some matte medium if you want to blend in the paint a little bit. So just blending the paint. Again, I told you we're just sort of playing with the paint, having fun. And I'm just going to add a couple different values on to get us started. So I'm going to add a little bit of the Payne's gray, just a little bit of a darker color. I'll put that up here too so you can see how nice and dark that is, and how it's kind of blending in with that cobalt teal. And again, you can see here, if you want, you can use some really loose brush strokes, which is nice, and at the same time, you can use some tighter ones. So again, going for that variety when we're painting. And at this stage of the painting, I'm really not thinking, I'm just sort of putting the paint down, just sort of enjoying the process. And you can see this Payne's gray is just a really nice color to use. And I should mention too that the two paintings in the front view of the shot I have are done in this color palette. So you can see again the variety you can get even using the same color palette. And other things you can do too that are kind of fun, since I've added a little bit of a darker color on here, you can do some mark making into this. So you can see with the pencil, just creating some marks into the paint. And I'm a mark maker, so I enjoy making marks when I paint. And we'll be building this painting up in a series of layers. So these are just the initial layers, so they're very early stage of the piece. And then I'll show you some of the other colors I have that we'll be working with. This is a bronze yellow. And then here we have an emerald green. I think these two colors look really nice together. And I'll just throw a little bit of that here. And then I think I'm going to make some more marks on the page. Again, in these layers, I'm just playing around, trying out different marks, seeing what I like. Maybe I want a little bit of a lighter color up here.
We have another question.
Okay, cool.
Let me see. Neelam is wondering what type of brush that you are using.
So this particular brush is actually a Liquitex. It's a 2 filbert. I really like these Liquitex brushes. They have a really nice bounce back on the bristles. So I highly recommend the Liquitex brushes as well. And then I'm also using some other brushes, and these ones here these are Dynasty brushes, and these will just have a little softer give to the bristles. Yeah, so as you can see, I'm just putting colors down, sort of going by what feels right.
I actually have another 2 questions that are extremely similar. The audience is wondering if you're using water to rinse your brushes or if you're using something else.
Yeah, I am using water to rinse the brushes. And you can also use water to thin the paint a little bit, but you only want to use a little bit of water. I would recommend using the medium if you do want to thin it out a little bit more. Yes, I'm just rinsing my brushes in water. And the one other color I want to show you guys is this parchment. This is a really fun color. So you can see here now we're adding a really light value against these medium and dark tones. And I'm actually going to put that up here too. And you can mix the colors straight on the page. You can see here I'm mixing the colors right on the sketchbook page.
We had another question from the audience.
Sure.
And it's moving fast, so I lost the name, but they were actually wondering if you ever work in larger scale.
I do. So this is probably the smallest size that I'll work is this 5 by 8 inch sketchbook. And I actually work pretty large. Right now I'm doing some large 4 by 5 foot works on paper. I've done 4 by 4 canvas, 3 by 3 canvas. So I work a wide range of sizes, and I think it's really important as part of your painting practice because it helps you just gain that versatility as an artist to try all different sizes. And as I mentioned too at the beginning, I'm working a larger sketchbook that's 14 by 17, so that's pretty fun too. The larger work will really allow you to be a little bit more free and expressive with the paint. So I do enjoy the larger work, but sometimes it's nice to work small. It just has a little bit of a different feel to it. And this is just a pencil I'm using. Sometimes it's fun, just a very simple mark making tool like a pencil can really give you some nice variety in your work. And then here I'm just going to tone this down a little bit. And you can see here these neutral colors, how they really add a nice complement to some of these brighter tones that we have. And you can notice too, I'm covering up most of the cerulean blue that we had, but just leaving little pops of the color in, just to add a little bit of visual interest to the piece.
Got another couple of questions.
Sure.
Sandy is wondering if these soft paints and inks work well on canvas.
Yes, they do. Definitely the soft body paints, I use them on the canvas. I believe the acrylic inks will work really well too.
And Michelle is, oh, my apologies, it is lost. Oh, Michelle is wondering if you would use tap water or distilled water.
I just use tap water. That seems to work fine. Yeah, so I think any kind of water that you use will be fine for the acrylic painting. You just want something to wash your brushes, to clean them off. And yeah, regular water should be fine for that.
Jessica would like to know if when you work with your larger canvases, if you have to lay your canvases flat.
So larger canvases, I would work on an easel or on a wall. You could lay them flat if you want to drip maybe some acrylic ink on it or some soft body paint. Sometimes you can work it on the floor, but I like to work vertical for the most part, unless I'm working on a small piece like a sketchbook, which I like to work on the table. Yeah, so thank you for all these questions. It's definitely fun to kind of invite you into my process and share with you how I work.
All right, and I actually have a couple of questions that came in earlier. From some of the audience members. The audience was curious to know what inspires your artwork.
Yeah, so I'm inspired by my surroundings a lot. I was living downtown in Chicago for a long time, and just being inspired by the city and the shapes that are surrounding you. So you'll notice in my work I have a lot of geometric shapes. I think that's really inspired by the city. And then, yeah, I'm inspired by colors around me. I sort of absorb what's around me. I like to go for these long walks, and when I do, I just sort of absorb my surroundings, and then I think that subconsciously translates into my paintings. So it's just a very fluid process, but yeah, I'm definitely like inspired by the environment around me.
Very cool. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I'm looking at this second painting in the front, and I definitely see kind of like a city in the evening.
Yeah, it kind of has this, like some of my work definitely has a city vibe to it with the geometric shapes.
The other question that came in earlier was, who is your favorite artist, if you have one?
Oh my
You can
gosh.
also name top 5 if you.
Okay, I have so many artists that I like. I was in a gallery in Chicago, in Thomas Masters Gallery, and he's got so many different talented artists in that gallery. So it's really fun to actually get to know the artists and be part of that space. And so some of the artists I love there, one is Melinda Stickney Gibson. Jack Flynn is another artist there. Tom, who owned the gallery, Thomas Masters, he's a fantastic painter. He's also an intuitive painter, so I think him and I really clicked on that level. So those are a couple artists that really inspired me, and it's really fun to get to know them too, because they have different process and different work than I do.
Very cool. We've got a couple of questions rolling in.
Okay.
Leah is wondering if you varnish or spray when you're finished, and if you do you use matte or gloss?
Yeah, so it definitely depends on the piece. If I'm doing large canvas work, I'll varnish it with a gloss varnish. If I'm doing works on paper, I'll usually use a matte varnish, and for small works, I'll tend to just use a liquid. For maybe medium-sized works, I'll use the spray varnish. For works that are just in my sketchbook, since they're just for me personally, I wouldn't probably varnish it, but you could if you wanted to. But yeah, definitely for finished pieces, I'll varnish them, and I like the Liquitex gloss varnish a lot for my larger pieces. Yeah, you can see here I'm using the pencil, and I'm actually really enjoying using this pencil right now. So if you're enjoying doing something when you're painting, I say just keep going for it and just have at it. So whatever you're liking, lean into that at the time. And again, as I said, these paintings will change and evolve as we go along.
Speaking of the pencil, an audience member is wondering if it is a watercolor pencil or just a basic, just regular pencil.
It's actually just a basic pencil. It's a 6B, so it'll be a little bit softer. A little bit softer pencil will give you a little bit more smoother feel to the page versus a harder one. So yeah, and then I also have here, sometimes I like to use, it's an ebony pencil. That can also be really nice to use, but any kind of pencil will do. I'll actually use anything you put in front of me when I paint. I love to use different tools and marks, and they all give you very different feel and look in your painting. So I think the more variety you have, the more interesting your pieces will be. And you can see here I'm now just making some marks with a brush. So just a very fine brush with the soft body paint. You can see how nicely and fluid it is right on the page. I'm actually really liking how this is coming along. You can see we're just in the initial stages, but we have the nice pops of color kind of showing through. We have some neutrals. Your eye moves with the different darks. We've got some texture in here with the pencil that we use, some marking in, etching in, and it's really fun. You can see how the color shows through from underneath. So we'll just keep going. Now I'm just adding some dots in here, just giving a little bit more of a more organic shapes to it. And thank you everyone so much for joining. It's super fun, as I said, to share my process with you. And we'll just keep building this up in different layers. And again, you can see what you like, you can see what you don't like. And the acrylic paint is great because you can always paint over it. So,
Got another question.
okay.
Yvonne is wondering if you can put ink over the top of your painting.
Yeah, so you can use the acrylic inks over the soft bodies. You can even mix them with the soft bodies. So I can kind of show that to you too right now. Say we take that cerulean blue that we started with, and you can see this. I'll show you how you can kind of like tint it. So say we just put a drop on here. You can see like how that'll mix in and what that'll do. So the acrylic inks work really well with the soft body paints because they're acrylics. So you can see here how we put that on top, really just adding this in. It's kind of mixing in with the soft body paint because it wasn't fully dry. If you do it a little bit thinner, it can just create a nice tint to the paint, or to the paint that you have down. And the other thing too is, like, I just put that on. If you want, you can blot it with a piece of paper. So for example, you can take a piece of paper and just blot it to take some of that paint off. And you can get some nice textures as well, and that actually looks pretty cool up there.
We have another question.
Okay.
Jessica also wants to let you know that she thinks you're so talented.
Oh, thank you so much.
But she also is wondering if you've ever used metallic paints or leafing on any of your work.
So I haven't used leafing, but I've used the metallic paints. Liquitex has some metallic colors. They have some gold colors and bronze and iridescent. So I've used the acrylic paints in terms of, and the inks in terms of the metallics, but I have not done any leafing on it. So maybe that's something I should try. It sounds like fun, actually. Yeah, and I think the more variety you can get in your pieces, the more interesting your paintings will be. So even here, just going back to this, that little nice texture we added on the top, I think really adds just a nice feel to the piece, just another area of visual interest. I'm just going to smooth out the edge of that. And you can see here too, like, I've just been working in the sketchbook for a little bit, so you can really, as part of your painting practice, you know, do a couple sketchbook pages every day or whenever, like, you don't have time to do your larger work. So it's really an accessible way to keep up your painting practice. Do we have any more questions?
We do, I was just about to say.
Awesome.
Kelly would like to know how long you've been painting with watercolor.
Yeah, so this is actually acrylic paint. It's acrylic ink and then acrylic soft body paint. I used to do actually watercolor because I used to be a realistic painter. And then I started the abstract work about 5 years ago, and it's just such a good fit with my style, and I absolutely love it. So right now, I tend not to use watercolors. I use mostly acrylic paints. Maybe once in a while I use watercolor or gouache, but I'm mostly an acrylic painter right now. And you can see here too, just even with this limited palette that we're using of like 5 to 6 colors, how when you're mixing them, you can get all these nice neutrals like here, and then even here, this just nice mixed color of the cobalt teal and the bronze yellow. So even if you're working a limited palette and don't have that many colors out, you can really have fun with it and get a lot of different variety with the color palette you have, or the colors that you have.
Ooh, we have another fun question.
Okay.
Sandy is wondering if you've ever used your sketchbook paintings as inspiration for larger pieces.
Yeah, so I actually have not. So I'm an intuitive painter, as I mentioned, and so I like the paintings to really flow from inside of me. So I don't like to have paintings around me or work off of a piece because I feel like that sort of inhibits that natural flow of your intuition. So I use it, as I described at the beginning of this session, I use it just to practice painting. And that itself translates to the larger pieces, because the more you practice painting from your intuition, practice working with colors, practice making marks, that'll all translate really nicely to the larger pieces. So I don't use them as direct inspiration, but I do use them as a practice so I can really get a nice flow in my larger work.
Patty would like to know if you are painting too much, if you're going over it too much, will it get muddy?
So if you're working wet into wet and you're going over it too much, you may end up with like a brown or a mud color. So the more you practice, you'll probably end up avoiding that. So one way to definitely avoid that is to let the layers dry. So you can see here, I'm working a little bit faster. So I do have some like wet into wet over here. If you're careful, you won't end up with the mud, and if you know what colors you're working with. But if you definitely want to avoid that, you can see here the paint's dry, so if I go over it, you won't end up with mud at all. So that's one way to sort of avoid that. This is actually a very beautiful gray color here on the side. Kind of really like that.
We have a question from Eileen.
Okay.
And she would like to know how you know when your painting is complete.
Oh, that's a really good question. So I do get asked that a lot. So for me, again, as an intuitive painter, I look for balance in my painting. So I look to see, does my eye feel rested? Does it feel like it just, as I described at the beginning, does it flow nicely throughout the page? Do I have nice variety in the piece so your eye is engaged in the painting? So I sort of intuitively know when I'm done. Sometimes also, like, I'll take a piece, I'll think I'm finished, I'll look at it the next day and be like, no, I think I could do a little bit more. So it is a little bit fluid, but for me it's more of an intuitive process of knowing when a painting is done. And the time it takes to finish a painting can definitely vary. So I wouldn't necessarily put a time limit on your paintings because they're intuitive and because you really want the painting to tell you where it wants to go. You don't want to rush it. You don't want to force it. That's why I said today, if we finish a painting, that's great. If not, I'll finish it tonight. You really want to let the painting tell you where it wants to go and when it's done. That's a great question. So now I'm just adding just a little bit of a darker brown up here and then sort of blending it in. Again, you can see here just that thin layer makes it a little bit duller from the paint that's next to it. So again, just adding a little bit more variety. And this is just using the medium with the brown color paint that I mixed up. It's the bronze yellow and a little bit of Payne's gray. Yeah, and I'm definitely liking the flow to this piece. I feel like right now it's got this nice flow starting at the top, coming down and going back up. So I'm really liking where this is going. We'll just continue building this up. And for these smaller paintings, you'll probably want some smaller brushes too. So like this size is a really nice size to work with. I'm just adding a little bit more darker value on this side. And you will want like a range of values when you're working on your piece. Yeah, so I'm really just seeing what I like in the painting and then going with more of that and seeing where the painting goes. So as I described, you really want the painting to tell you where it wants to go. You don't want to force the painting to go somewhere. because it'll always be better if you let the painting guide you versus you trying to force a piece. And you can see too, as I'm painting, just how nicely these soft body paints are working on the page. They have such a beautiful flow. Really fun to work with. And here I'm just blending the colors a little bit, just to get some nice transitions. You want to think a little bit about your transitions too, so you can have some harder transitions, and then sometimes you want more softer ones. So that's something to think about too as you're painting. What do those transitions look like?
We have another question from Sherry.
Okay.
And she's wondering if you use any of the traditional rules of composition in your paintings.
Oh, that's very interesting. So again, being an intuitive painter, I just sort of go and sort of feel out my compositions, but I probably actually do use the traditional compositions if you look at my pieces, and maybe we can flip through to one or two of these and just see. For instance, this one here, it's got a horizontal composition where your eye is going from here down here. So it's got this horizontal composition where your eye goes across and down. And so I think I do probably use the traditional compositions. It's just I don't think about it when I paint. Composition and color are going to be really important for the abstract painting. So you definitely want to get a handle on both of those, because that's what's going to make your abstract paintings really work and your paintings really stand out on the page. So now I'm just going to take a fine brush and just draw some lines, just to show you how you can nicely draw some lines with the soft body paints. See how fluidly they move. It's just a really fun way to create some more marks in your painting. Yeah, these have been great questions. Thank you, guys. And a fine brush will really give you a little bit more detail.
We had a question from earlier, and it was from the audience, and it was, how long have you been creating art? And I think we asked that before we went live, but I wasn't sure if we've asked that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I've always been very creative, drawing and painting. So art has always been a part of my life. I grew up as a realistic painter. I think I may have mentioned that. And then I started the abstract work about 5 years ago. So I used to do all realistic painting, like figures, still life, and portrait. And the realistic painting actually gives you such a great foundation in the elements of painting, because you'll use all of those elements in the abstract work. It's just you're not painting an object, or you're not painting a portrait or a face. So as I kind of mentioned, you want your colors to be in harmony. You want to think about your composition, your lines, shapes, values. All those elements of realistic painting will translate really nicely as a great foundation for your abstract work. Yeah, so if you are a realistic painter and want to think about getting into abstract painting, it is kind of fun. It's very different, but it is fun, and you can definitely make that transition. The other thing I like about this brush is you can either paint it flat, because it's a filbert, or you can use the very side of the brush. So that'll give you some interesting marks too. And I'm a mark maker when I paint, so I'm always making different kinds of marks and shapes in my paintings, and different lines. And you can see too, I was just drawing those lines and now I've covered them up. So you don't have to keep anything in your piece. You can just really fluidly go as the painting progresses. Don't be afraid to get rid of something that you painted or to repaint something that you liked. you can always get your painting back. It's a very forgiving process with the acrylic painting. I'm definitely enjoying how this piece is coming out. It's really fun. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is that you'll notice I work the whole piece at the same time. So I really want to, I'm not just focused and stuck in one area, I'm kind of moving throughout the piece constantly. And that's really important when you're painting because you don't want to have one great area and the rest of the piece, have that area not work with the rest of the piece. So make sure you kind of work your full painting, and especially such a small piece like this, you can definitely do that pretty easily. So that's another thing to think about when you're painting. So I'm just darkening this value on this side here.
Patty would like to know, are you using a wet palette?
I am actually just using palette paper. So this is actually Blick palette paper. It's fantastic. I love it. And it comes in all different sizes. So right now I have a smaller size, and I also have a larger size if you're working with a lot more paint. But since I've got just a small piece here today. And here I'm going to add just a couple more dots just to sort of carry through that theme, which I think is rather fun. And then here I'm just brightening up some of the colors on the top. And I'm actually really liking how this is turning out, but say you didn't like where this was going, the great thing about acrylic paint is that you can just paint over sections, you can change the piece entirely, and you can actually change the pieces pretty quickly, because, especially for a small painting. Because it is acrylic paint, it dries really fast, which is nice, so you can constantly change your pieces until you get to a place where you're really happy with the finished painting. So again, I'm just brightening up some sections, just adding a little bit more contrast down here. I'm just going to add a little bit more of that cobalt teal color here. I want a little bit more of that in this piece. So maybe just add a couple more, and add a little white so it stands out a little bit more. Just add a couple more marks of that.
Jill would like to know if you only use watercolor paper for sketchbook paintings.
Yeah, so I don't. This is a watercolor sketchbook. And the watercolor paper is nice because, as you can see, it's pretty thick. So it'll have a nice, it's pretty thick, so like your paint will sit nicely on the page. You can also use thinner paper, but then the more paint you use on it, you just have to be careful with the paper not warping. But watercolor is nice because it's nice and thick. And then for the larger sketchbook that I have, it's actually mixed media paper. I think it's like 98-pound mixed media paper. So that's a little bit thinner, but that still works really well. And if you are using any thinner paper, I would say anything thinner than like 90 pounds, you probably want to put a coat of gesso on it first. Because this watercolor paper is nice and thick, I don't even gesso the paper in here, but you could if you wanted a different surface or a smoother surface, because the watercolor paper will have a little bit of texture to it, as you can see on this side.
And Leah is wondering what the heaviest paper you use is.
The heaviest paper, probably like a 140-pound is a good watercolor paper. I do some 18 by 24 inch pieces. I think I like the 140-pound watercolor paper. That works really well, and I actually gesso that first. So I would try some different papers and see what you like. the best way to find stuff out is just to try and experiment with it, and you'll definitely find what you like for your painting style and see what works. But I do like the watercolor paper just for these small sketchbook pieces because you don't need to gesso it. It's nice and thick and it really holds the acrylic paint really well. So I'm just making some small changes to the piece right now. So you'll start out making broader strokes and working in larger spaces. And then as you progress through the piece, you'll notice you'll probably focus more on finer details and smaller spaces in the painting. So you'll work more from like broad to narrow. So right now I'm working a little bit on some of the smaller spaces. I'm going to take back my pencil again. You can also etch into your piece with the pencil, and what'll happen is if you've got a couple layers on, you'll see what's coming through is what's underneath, and that's kind of a fun look as well. You can see we did that here, and I'm doing a little bit more of that here. Just again adding more variety to the painting as we go. This is really having just a nice feel to it. And I'm always looking to balance out the piece. So my eye is always looking, does the painting look balanced? That's how we had that question at the beginning. How do you know when it's finished? Does it have a nice range of colors? Does it feel balanced to me? So that's what I'm looking for right now as I'm looking at this piece. Just going over some of these. If you go over with the soft body paints a couple times, it'll just get a little bit of more of a thickness and more of opacity to it. And again, the acrylic paints are very forgiving, so never be afraid to try something. You can always go back. And I would recommend trying. And again, too, like the one thing I want to stress when you're painting is that it should always be fun. So just make sure you're enjoying the process, because most of painting is all in the process. And when you're having fun in your painting, that'll show through in the finished piece in terms of the energy of the marks. So you always want to make sure you're having fun when you're painting. And hopefully you're having fun here today. So right now I'm just changing up some of the sections. Just again, blending some sections together. Just really trying to go for that nice flow in the piece where your eye is moving throughout the painting. I'm really enjoying these blues and greens. They're so fun too, and again, like the variety you can get with just using the same color palette with a couple of different pieces, like I showed you the one we initially did, and a couple here that I have at the front. So are there any more questions, Ryan, or are we about time to wrap it up?
A lot of comments. Patty says that she's excited to try it. She said it looks so relaxing.
That's awesome. Yes, definitely try it. Definitely try the soft body paints and the acrylic inks. That's a great place to start if you're new to painting as well.
We had someone asking about your Instagram account, which we shared with them.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, definitely follow me on Instagram. I'm always sharing a lot about my process. So if you want to see more about my process, please feel free to follow me on there. So we have any last questions?
Yes. We have a question from Eileen asking if you, let me see, it's scrolling a little bit. If you were struggling, if you ever struggle between creating realistic and abstract art.
So now I primarily do the abstract paintings, and I used to do all the realistic work. Sometimes I actually combine the two. Where I'll do these abstract portraits. You can see those on my website. It's just a fun combination of the realistic and the abstract painting. And then sometimes I will just do figure drawing because I think it's really important to keep up those realistic painting skills because, like I said, they translate to the abstract work. But right now I'm mostly focused on the abstract work, and I generally don't have an issue switching between the two when I do.
Susan's wondering, have you ever mixed these paints with a gel medium?
So I have not. I generally don't use the gel medium. I use either the matte medium or the gloss medium. I really want the paint to be a little bit more fluid. I think the gel medium will make it a little bit thicker, so it'll go for a different look to it. So they have a lot of different mediums that can give you a lot of different effects in the paint. So it really depends what you're looking for in your piece. And so, as I kind of mentioned, I'm always looking for flow and fluidity in my paintings. So I'm going to probably either tend toward a gel or a matte medium to get that fluidity and flow in my painting. So I'm just going to do a little bit more here. And if there's any last questions, please write them in and let us know. And I love that you said that it looks like painting is relaxing. So painting should really be fun. It should be just an enjoyable process to tap into that intuition and those feelings. So it should be very relaxing and fun. It shouldn't be stressful. So you should really just enjoy the process.
We have a question from Leah, wondering if you had any favorite scratching tools.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my pencil is probably my favorite scratching tool. You'll see I use it a lot here. Pencil is actually probably one of my favorite mark making tools. I think it's highly underrated. It's such a good tool to etch into your paintings, to just create different marks. I always have a pencil around when I'm painting because it's got a lot of different uses to it. So not only making the marks, but scratching into the paint. And this is probably one of my favorite mark making tools. You can also use some other ones over here. I've got just this tool here, which can give you different lines in your piece. So it's really fun to experiment with different mark making tools. And again, that'll give you that variety I was talking about at the beginning, where you really want to just have a nice range of variety in your pieces so your eye keeps moving throughout the painting. Yeah, so you can see here now I'm just using the pencil you can also darken some areas with the pencil. That's really nice too. And sometimes it's very subtle, but it does make a difference in the painting.
Wendy would like to know if you've tried gouache and if it has similar effects.
So I have used gouache. I used to use it a lot when I was doing realistic painting. It's very similar to watercolor except that it's opaque, so it's not going to be translucent or transparent. And I think gouache will be a bit thinner, so I do like the acrylics better for the abstract painting because they're thicker, you can layer them. I haven't used gouache in a while, so I would recommend using the acrylic paints, the soft body paints if you want to get started, and then you can always try out the gouache. I think it's good to try out all different materials and see what really suits your painting style. So for me, it's the acrylic paints. And now I'm making some more triangles because I just have to have some geometric shapes in my paintings. And you can see here too, I really like how you can see that blue coming through from underneath, and then here you just have the pencil line into this beige color. So kind of just continuing with that over there, and I think I'm going to bring down this color here. I actually think we might finish this sketchbook page today, which is kind of fun.
Karen actually mentions that until this demo, she would have never thought of using a graphite pencil over acrylic, and she's excited to let loose with painting more.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, definitely be free when you paint. Just as you can see where the way I started this, we sort of just dropped paint on there, we created some layers, we saw what we liked, what we didn't like. The best is to just be free with your painting practice. It's going to really show through in your finished pieces. Yeah, and just try the pencils. You can also try, as I mentioned before, the ebony pencil. Actually, any kind of pencil will do. Anything that'll make marks on there will be really fun to try. And it's really fun to explore these different mark-making materials when you're painting. So just to try different things. And like I said, if there's one thing I want you to take away, it's to have fun with the painting process and just really enjoy your paintings. Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. So again, just adding a couple more things to the piece. Kind of deciding how much of that dark color I want on the top right now. And again, you can try it, see if you like it, and then change it if you want. Now I'll just use a little bit of that matte medium. To bring down this value here.
Teaguin wonders, if you wanted to try the paints that you're using, what colors would you suggest trying first? Or if you had any recommendations for a starter set?
Yeah, so actually Liquitex has a starter set. They have a couple different ones you can try, which are either like 6 paints or 12 paints. And that's going to give you a really good place to start with the acrylic paints. So they're generally some primaries that you can mix and then some secondary colors. So if you wanted to create your own starter set, I would recommend one of each of the 3 primary colors, a white, a black, and then maybe 1 or 2 secondary colors that you're really drawn to that can give you a pop of color when you're painting. And you can always mix the primary colors then to create the colors that you want, but just really pick the colors you're drawn to, again, very intuitively. So start with some primaries and add in a couple colors that you're drawn to. And that'll give you a great set to just get started and try the painting and see what you like. So I think I'm just going to add a little bit more of a lighter value over here.
We actually had a couple people wondering about the acrylics in general, just wondering how they've been able to not harden over time. We had a few people just wondering about how they've been able to stay fluid this entire time.
Oh, this entire time that we're painting? So actually, I just put out the paintings right before we started painting. I have them on my palette here, and they're still fine. They're just, I think they stay fluid for a while, so they will dry out. It depends on your climate and the environment you're in too. But right now, the acrylic paints are still very fluid. If you didn't want them to dry out, you could cover them with something if you had to go away and then come back. But generally, for the amount of time that I'm painting and for the amount of paint that I put out, I don't really have an issue with the paint drying on the palette, especially because the paint's all together. And then the layers that we put on here are pretty thin, so these will dry out a little bit faster. Yeah, so these have stayed fluid the whole time. And again, now I'm back to the pencil. So always have a pencil when you're painting. And what I'm liking too is just this range of blues and greens that we've gotten in this piece. So we have these nice neutral colors, a range of neutrals, a range of blues and greens, and then we have this nice dark on top. So this is really coming along nicely. I may actually carry this color down just to see how that looks. And then just to show you too how you can mark into it when you have a darker color underneath. So you can create some lines. You can see how that nicely really creates some beautiful lines in there. And then if you did that and you weren't happy with it, like I said, you can always repaint over sections. Maybe I just want to keep that bottom one and not the top one. Especially when the paint's wet, you can really paint over it and blend it in again. If you're not happy with it at all, you can always wipe it out. So it's the beauty of acrylic paint. It's very forgiving. So I hope you guys try the paints, especially the Liquitex paints. I think you'll be super happy with them and really enjoy painting with them. And then also what I've started to do too is just have 1 or 2 of the acrylic inks out every time I paint. They're just really fun for adding that variety into your pieces and mixing into your paints. So you can just try that out too, just see how versatile they are. I think it adds a really nice fun touch. So I really like how I changed that to make that a little bit lighter on the top. I just think I want a little bit of a lighter white here. And you'll notice I'll go back into certain sections and I'll rework them several times. So never be afraid to go back, change things up. Sometimes I'll change it, I'll realize I didn't like it, and I'll go back again. So really, just enjoy your process of painting. And again, I think just adding a little bit of white down here really helps to move your eye through the piece. And I think I'm going to go over some of these white dots again too. And I always like a range of brushes, so you'll notice I'm using a very fine brush here, and then I had the filbert brush, and then some flats too that are a little bit bigger. So you want to range when you're painting. Just a couple brushes will be fine to get started with the sketchbook. I'm just adding a little bit more white up top. I think I want to add a little bit more color on this side. I need something a little bit more muted, so I'm just going to mix a couple colors. So I'm just going to finish this right here, and then I will start to wrap it up. So thank you, Ryan, for all the questions. Perfect. I'm just going to add a little bit of this green color here. We'll start to wrap it up. So I'll show you where we are with the painting. So this is the piece here that we have so far. So as you can see, we started working with the color palette of those 5 to 6 colors. We have a nice range of the colors with the darks, the Payne's gray up here. We have some of those bright pops of color. We've etched into the paint. We've created some variety. I love this little detail up here from taking the paper and peeling it off. And then we have some neutrals here too, which really make these colors pop on the top. I like the flow of the piece, how it really flows from the top here and your eye is sort of drawn to the bottom. And then we have some interesting marks, including these dots, some marks here made with the paintbrush, some lines and some aqua color dots, and then also some smaller ones. So just a really nice, beautiful flow to this piece. I may do a little bit more to this painting, or I may leave it. So either way, definitely check back on my Instagram to see what the final piece looks like. And I have really enjoyed painting with you guys today. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free to connect with me on Instagram. I'm more than happy to answer them. I've loved all your questions today. And I want to say a special thank you to Blick Art Materials and the team here at Blick. They've been absolutely fantastic. And also to Liquitex for having me here today. So thank you so much. I've had so much fun painting with you. Remember to keep on painting, and I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you so much.